that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I have a dream today.
Your body went to sleep, but your mind is still caught up in a warfare. Your mind is the battleground.
It's psychological warfare.
With AJ, Norton. Salutations, everyone. I hope you enjoy this episode. Today, I interview Nancy Virden, a mental health advocate who has had a struggle with depression and suicide. In this episode, we go over her journey and how she still copes with it today, and hopefully provide some support and advice to anyone to get through depression and to better understand themselves. I hope you enjoy this interview and discussion. Nancy, you are a mental health advocate, correct?
Yes.
What got you started advocating for mental health? I know it's very important, and I think it's an area a lot of people undervalue, and they just maybe think about their physical health if they're eating well, but they don't understand maybe the complications of their dwindling mental health and how that can affect a lot of facets of their life.
That's right. And I'm definitely one of those people. As far as I know, I've had major depression as a part of my life since my teen years. I can point to several episodes that were most definitely major depressive episodes. I have never really given it a whole lot of respect, I guess you might say, until I was 49 years old. And when that turned into the worst major depressive episode I've ever had, and a suicide attempt as well, as I was coming out of that, therapy and life experiences and what I was feeling and so on and so forth showed me that there's a lot that needs to be said out there about taking care of your mental health and primarily knowing how to support someone who is struggling that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what brought me around to the advocacy. But I'm definitely one of those people who didn't really grasp that it was important for a long time. I thought that I had episodes that would come and go and they could get pretty serious, but I could not predict them, and so it was just a matter of live and let live. And it took a while for me to really understand what power we have over limiting our suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been it's been enlightening to know that I can manage this, that I have options and I have a say in how much I struggle.
Mm-hmm. Now, you basically sound like you've been battling mental problems your whole life.
Pretty much, yeah.
That kind of accumulated to the suicide attempt you just mentioned.
Yes.
Looking back on your life, was your depression, I think a lot of people are human brains, we kind of look at the big events that happen in our lives and we use these big events to summarize ourselves. But
that's true.
But was your resulting depression the result of all of these kind of needles, like 1,000 little things that snowballed into this eventual event, which you kind of define?
Yeah, you know what? Depression is complex, and first of all, we're complex.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot describe our lives by events that have occurred in it. We can only summarize it. I think the word you used. We can only summarize our existence with with some high points and low points, but we can certainly not define who we are and how we have faced life and what we've done or haven't done. We cannot determine our character by what we've experienced. We have to look at a much bigger picture. So sometimes stigma says that depression is a character flaw, and that's incorrect. Let me repeat, that's incorrect. It is not a character flaw. We have a lot of things that can lead to depression and a lot of things that can help us get out of it. But it is for me, I used to point to specific things. I used to say, okay, I had a troubled family of origin. I used to say I had a troubled marriage. I used to say I had difficulty coping. And you know what? All of those things are true. And I used to say them, and frankly, I think I still do, because they are all part of the big picture. But not any one of those things by themselves caused depression. So it is easy to try and wrap it up into a nice little bundle, because if we can do that, if we can describe it and measure it, then we can put an end to it, right? We can have some control over, okay, that happened to me when I was a kid, so I just won't think about that anymore, and then I won't be depressed. Or, okay, I had this troubled marriage, well, I'll just end that, and then I won't be depressed anymore, and so on and so forth. And it's not that simple. Although changing our environment, changing our thoughts, learning how to manage and learning how to gain and maintain a mindset of hope, all of those things definitely play roles in how well we experience our mental health.
Well said. Now, I think that creates a perfect segue into how you faced your depression problem. Now, when you got treatment for depression, I've never personally had treatment. That's why I love interviewing people and you. But when you decided to confront this problem, did you find out that you had to face those past events you were talking about, where you had to at least acknowledge your bad marriage or somehow come to peace with that? And how did you do that, or did you?
Oh yes, AJ, it was a huge big deal for me, and it took about 5 years for me to get from, I would say, the far spectrum of wanting to die to the other end, which is, oh, I have a purpose for being here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in those 5 years, there was a lot of wavering. That's not a straight line. There was a lot of roller coastering, right? But in the beginning, it was very difficult for me to come to the point where I was willing to look at life as a viable option, because it had taken so long for me to get to the point to decide that it was not. And what I mean by that is that I'm a Christian. I have been in some sort of ministry or another all my life. And so my mindset is around faith. It's around God has a purpose and so on and so forth. So for me personally, to drop to God can no longer use me and there's nothing life has for me anymore was maybe, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know, but perhaps it was a further drop than it is for some people. It was a huge decision on my part to go from, yes, life matters, to I can't fight this anymore. And when I say decision, I mean that for me, there was a little bit of a sway that I can point back to. Not everybody can point back to something. So I want to make that very clear. It is not something somebody wakes up and goes, yeah, I guess I'm done. I think I just don't want to face life anymore. Suicide is a very complex issue, and it is attached to a lot of different warnings, signs, reasons, causes, if you will, etc. And every single person is different. I am only referring to me personally when I say that looking back, I think there was a little bit of a sway where I decided I don't want to fight this, and I'm not going to try and pursue help.
Mm-hmm.
Because of my Christian background, I knew that not pursuing help was not an option. And that goes back to, okay, I want to honor God, right? I want to live out whatever purpose he has for me. And even though I had said to myself, nothing is worth it, I was driven by that God probably knows whether it's worth it or not. So I should probably go get some help. I try to describe this the best I can as a little too little, a little too late, because I was already severely, majorly depressed. And by the time I reached out for help, I'm not sure that I wasn't already past the point of no return. That's difficult for someone who hasn't been there to understand, I think that people who have been there will understand what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
That there comes a point where it ceases being really your choice so much as it is that's just where your illness is taking you.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, it had already been a decision, as I said, a few weeks prior, to not fight this anymore, and so it was just kind of a little easier, I might say, to cross the line from, okay, I'm going to really fight to stay alive, to I'm going to ignore my survival instinct and do what I can to take my life.
Mm-hmm.
I caution everyone listening to not assume that my experience is everyone else's experience. I'm only describing what it was like for me.
No,
After that, a psychologist called me, and there's details around that are expressed a little more clearly in my book, but he called me, and I ended up in the hospital, and I fought getting well for quite some time. Because for me, that decision I'd made, or that mindset, I should say, that I had claimed as my own, was really hard to change. Like I said, it had taken a long time for me, years, to get to the point where I was willing to say, you know what, God doesn't have a purpose for me anymore. So once I had made that decision, it was really hard to switch back. And maybe I'm stubborn, maybe it was the illness, I couldn't tell you for sure. But it was difficult, and so that was the process that took a long time, getting from life has no purpose to maybe I should find out if it does, to okay, I'm going to explore this and see what my purpose is.
Mm-hmm. No, it sounds like when you reached that decision, the walls of your mind sort of changed. So you now are taking in different inputs and outputs. So it can be hard to go back to maybe a different mindset or a previous mindset where now that you've changed, it's harder for you to go back because you now think you're here for a reason.
Oh, do you
like
think
you
it's
described.
okay? So you're thinking on the positive end that now that I'm on the side of life has a purpose, that it's harder for me to go back to it doesn't?
No, I
Is that what
mean,
you're saying?
through the course of your journey. That, for instance, when you're depressed, I was listening to you, and it came across to me that you now don't think Christ has a purpose for you, correct?
Oh, not now. No, this was back in 2011. I'm sorry, I didn't date it, but it took about 5 years from 2011 to come to the
Mm-hmm.
conclusion that he certainly mostly does.
And yeah,
You know,
so
it's
no,
not a
so you
doubt
went from,
anymore.
it's more complicated than that, but you changed your frame of mind. Would you say correct that you went from a dark place of he's not open, his arms are not open to me, to now I am worthy of God's grace and I can get out of this depression?
You know what's interesting? I am trying to I'm trying to actually walk through all this myself. So
Mm-hmm.
if I sound a little hesitant, it's because I'm still trying to figure out exactly myself, and that goes back to our point that we can summarize things with big events and big decisions, etc., but that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
solidify the whole story. So what I think I would like to say in a more general way is that I had spent my life in a marriage that was very painful and difficult, and I had put all my hope into this marriage. If I didn't receive the love from my husband that I thought I was supposed to receive, then I didn't have any purpose for living anymore. When I finally came to the conclusion that I wasn't going to get that marriage that I wanted, that's kind of the point at which my decision was made that I didn't have a whole lot of reason to be here after that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I say decision again, I know my mind was absolutely pummeled with depression already. I was already ill when that happened. I did not wake up one day and go, oh, you know what, I'm unhappy, I think I'll just end my life. What happened is that depression had been coming on for months, and I might say a little more slowly over a period of a few years. And by the time I came to that point where it's like, okay, I give up. I don't have, I mean, I give up on hoping for this marriage. When I came to that point, I had already been in the negative mindset that comes with depression. I had already been to the point where I was fighting to stay alive, to stay well, to keep moving regardless of how I felt, etc. That was already a battle. So when it came to the point that I believed there was no hope for my marriage, it was that decision was fed a bit by my negative thinking, but it was also because for years and years and years I had placed my hope in that marriage rather than in Christ alone. So when it became a thing that I couldn't live without, you might say, it became, why does my life count at all?
Mm-hmm.
Now we can fast forward to now, and what has happened is that through that process of coming to understand that and actually leaving the marriage and finding a freedom in Christ that I didn't realize I had before, replacing my hope onto that standard that never changes, which is God's word, I have now come, I don't want to say full circle because I'm beyond where I've ever been. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm
You
now
have
to the point
achieved a new paradigm.
I'm at the point now where, you know, I know who is the center of my hope, and I know that no matter what happens, that is how I can keep moving. I
Okay.
think that you said something about, I'm not sure if I misunderstood you, but I was thinking that it would be important to explain that depression has not left me as a struggle. Now, it has left me in the sense that I am not majorly depressed. I am not struggling to face each day as to whether I should be here or not. But what is a consistency is that depression will still come around.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of mornings ago, I woke up and I couldn't figure out why I even mattered. I was so sad. But I knew how to manage it because I've learned through therapy and life experience how to address those moments rather than just sitting in them.
Mm-hmm.
So depression did not grow beyond that afternoon. It took a few hours, but after that, I had addressed it appropriately.
No, great. No, it sounds like you said, you now are more conscious, at least, on how to address your problems. But if not addressed, they can eke back into your life.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right.
Now, you prophetically said earlier that everyone's depression situation is vastly different. But for the listeners, what would you recommend to anyone who's feeling or seeing any signs of depression in their lives? Would you recommend going to see a therapist, or would you recommend at least kind of a few steps for people to try to figure out what their situation is?
Well, since I'm not a therapist or a doctor, I shy away from telling people what they should do. I can only really focus on what works for me. So what I have discovered and have seen it work in other people's lives as well is that if you don't judge yourself for feeling bad, you're already one step ahead of a lot of other people. When we have depression or, hey, any strong emotion, sometimes we want to turn around and point the finger at ourselves and say, see, you're such a loser. You feel that way. You shouldn't feel that way. You know, and then come the shoulda, couldas and all that. And it's like, no, you feel that way, period. Accept that you feel that way. You can say, okay, you know what? Depression is bothering me right now. I don't like it. I really don't like it. But I accept me. I'm just human and I'm going to have emotions. And right now this is a problem, but I accept me. And then as a person of faith, I also can say God accepts me. So that kind of non-judgmental thing is a real step in the right direction. at that point, we can stop obliterating ourselves in a way, and we give ourselves the permission to step forward and see what we can do about it next.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on where we're at in our episode of depression, that answer is going to be very, very different. There are some people who may be listening to your podcast who aren't able to get out of bed. They cannot. They're laying in bed. They've been there for days. They don't know how to function. They have no idea that they even want to function. Their pain is so enormous. That's all they see. That is all they see. On the other, there are other people who are feeling depression that has just extended a little past feeling blue, and they're wondering whether this is a problem or not, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So if you cannot judge it, then you can allow yourself the permission to say, okay, what can I do next? To the people who feel like maybe depression is becoming a problem, I suggest seeing a diagnostician about that.
Okay.
Now, you don't have to see a psychiatrist necessarily right away anyway. I mean, you can see a therapist. You can find out, is this really something? Some information you can find online, although I think everybody warns everyone else about diagnosing yourself online. But you can get some information there about what the signs are and so on.
Mm-hmm.
To the person who is in bed and really, really can't see past their covers, I would say to them that for me, taking one step towards self-care started the very slow and painful process towards wellness.
Okay.
So it may be nothing more than I'm going to sit up in bed for 5 minutes. It might be something a little beyond that where I'm going to go take a shower. But yeah, go ahead.
So self-care, like you just said, could be anything, as opposed to, it could be mental wellness, physical wellness, spiritual wellness, right? Like do 10 sit-ups a day, take a shower, make a friend.
All of those things. But when you're at a certain point in a severe depression, those are not all options.
Mm-hmm. No, your explanation of the levels, it's a spectrum.
Wherever you are, you know where you are, and
Mm-hmm.
you know what you can do. So push the envelope, do what you can do. Don't beat yourself up if you can't do more. Just accept that that's where you are right now. And then the next day or the next day, try to do a little more.
Well said.
But the progress is forward, backwards sometimes. So we have to be really kind to ourselves.
We think about events as black or white, but often our life is lived in the gray. Those little moments may set us back or forward just a tiny bit, but that can build up over time.
Yes, I had a sign that I hung on my wall after some time. I didn't do this right away. But after some time, I wrote on a big old piece of paper, I think it was like 5 foot tall and 3 foot wide. I wrote, what kind of person do you want to be? What steps will you take today toward becoming that person? And for a long time, that was very painful to read because I wanted to be in bed. I wanted to obsess. I wanted to just hide. And I was telling myself, those aren't options. You really have to just do something, anything. Sometimes I looked at that sign and stuck my tongue out and ignored it. Sometimes I looked at the sign and went and brushed my teeth. Sometimes I looked at that sign and went and had a healthy meal. Over time, that started to build up into more muscle strength towards self-care. And then I was making decisions like, okay, I want to call a friend. Okay, I want to write a positive journal today. And then it grew and grew and grew until it became, I want to go to that event. I want to go and invite people over. And that's what I'm talking about, is that the tiny, tiny steps of self-care give you a little bit of energy that maybe the next one you can do, and then the next one. But we have to be very kind to ourselves. Mm-hmm. We're not going to go from I'm so depressed that I'm in bed and can't move to being the socialite the next day.
Gotcha.
That's not going to happen.
Now, did those little events and looking at that poster on your wall, did that slowly give you the realization that you have control, or you can go make friends, or you can slowly unearth this ability to feel better?
I was still, at the time that I put up that sign, I was still in the muddled quandary of, do I care to change or not?
Mm-hmm.
And it was complicated, but what I was hearing from professionals was, you matter, your life is valuable, you can change this, you have a say, you have options. And then I was driven by that desire to honor Christ and to live out God's purpose for my life. Those two things together made me do things I didn't want to do that were positive and built up into whole health. It took time, like I said, but it was definitely that sign, and little things that I chose to do were definitely building blocks to the next and the next. And I did see over time that I did have a say. I did have some power over this.
No, it sounds like you did realize you had power, and that slowly came back.
Yes.
Hey everyone, hope you're enjoying the show. Before you hit that fast forward button, I would like you to consider supporting the show by either leaving a review on iTunes, mucho helpful, or contributing on my Patreon page. You can contribute as little as $1 a month for special perks at psychowarfare.com/Patreon. This show relies on you to keep itself supported. Now, back to the show. No, I just think that's so important in all challenges we face. We forget that we have so much power over situations that we can control, and we choose to focus on situations we can't control.
And that helps. That helps us to be very weak and even in some cases ill, because we do focus on what we can't control.
Mm-hmm.
I could not control my marriage. I had tried for a long time. Everything I did seemed to not add up to squat. Mm-hmm. I'm not calling myself perfect. I brought baloney into the marriage as well. Okay, let's be clear about that. But as far as what I was trying to do to fix things, it seemed like I wasn't going anywhere. I had to come to the conclusion that I wasn't in control over that particular circumstance, but I was in control over how I responded to it. I didn't have to become a nobody. I didn't have to allow my identity to be swallowed up in that. And over time, these lessons came to me. And as I said, I'm still learning. This was in 2011 that the suicide attempt took place and the healing began. And 6 years later, I'm still learning, because I'm not a young person. I am by some standards, but I'm 56 years old. The suicide attempt was at 49. And some of the life lessons that I've had to change were deeply ingrained. So as much as I am looking forward now and trusting that I have some power and so on and so forth, I'm also aware that I'm still in the process of learning how.
Mm-hmm. No, life is a journey, and you're always working on something. And
True.
you're still a spring chicken, Nancy. Don't worry. Nancy, talk about the support families can provide or others can provide to somebody.
Well, it's really difficult when someone is in a lot of pain to watch that from the outside, mm-hmm. especially if it's someone you love. It's very human and very normal to want to fix that. It is actually an act of love to want to fix that. But we cannot fix that. That's another one of those situations that's out of our control. What we can do is provide the foundational support that they need to help themselves. So if you see someone, particularly if they're talking about suicide and showing signs of that, get them to help. If there are threats of suicide, if there's a crisis in the making, call 911. Get them to somebody who can help intervene and knows how to do that, because they're a professional in that field. Beyond crisis, if you're talking to someone who is in bed a lot and they're having trouble moving, or someone who even on the other end of the spectrum just seems to be melancholy and negative all the time. There are things that we can do to support these people, and one of them is to not judge them for being who they are not. In other words, look at their life. Are they someone who is normally a little more energetic, someone who kind of maybe even enjoys being around people? Is this someone who enjoys being with you? Do they have activities that they are usually involved in that they don't want to skip? And now are they the opposite of that?
Mm-hmm.
Don't assume that their character is flawed, that they have suddenly become this person who's lazy and doesn't care about anybody. Why take that leap? It's not fair. This is somebody who has been a certain person, and it's why you love them, and now they are someone else, and that is because they are ill. So we can't be diagnosticians. Most of us are not mental health professionals. We can get them to professional help. So the non-judgment thing is really, really primary.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that we can do to support people is to just be there. That sounds too simplistic. Darn it, we want we want to know what we can do to fix things. But the best thing we can even do is to sit with them, even silently or with words. Sit next to them and do your Facebook or your bills or whatever. Just be there. Let them know that when they isolate in their bedroom, you haven't forgotten about them. You can go in and sit in that bedroom and just be with them. Tell them that you aren't going to leave them alone because you care, and then just go about your business. This sounds so easy, but it is one of the hardest things to do. There are a variety of things in between that we can do, and I do recommend my website for that. There's a lot of information there about how you can support someone who is dealing with major depression. Go ahead.
Mention your website. What is the name of your website?
alwaysthefight.com.
Great. I'll link it in the show notes.
Okay.
Now, I like what you said about the supportive role, where it is not your job as a supporter to fix them, but it's your job to help them and make their environment easier so they can fix themselves ultimately. Because it seems to me that ultimately they have to take the steps themselves to fully come to peace with their minds and ultimately themselves.
We are all responsible for saving our own lives. Regardless of where we are in the depression process, we are responsible for saving our own lives. That does not mean that people are really capable of doing that all the time, all by themselves. They need to know, we need to know, I needed to know that somebody cared about me and would believe in me. It was not, I'll tell you what, I have heard situations, and this is where I'll use this one young girl as an example. She was an adult but young, and she had a father who would just rail her when she came home from the hospital after a suicide attempt, calling her all kinds of names, like lazy and attention seeking and all of these things. And she turned right around and tried again. Is that a guaranteed follow-up to that kind of treatment? No, there's no guarantee. But he did not help her. When I was talking to her, she said all she needed to hear from him was, I love you, I'm sorry this happened, what can we do to prevent it in the future? And since she didn't get that, it was devastating. So when I say not judgmental, I'm talking about yelling at people to be different, holding them to blame for everything that is unhappy in your life as a result of their illness, making them feel less than because you think their behavior is something you don't like and you don't understand. Why not just try and understand it? Why not just sit down with them and say, try to tell me. I don't get it, but I care about you. Try to explain it to me. And if they can't, how about going online to the professional sites? You can go to my site. You can go to NAMI. You can go to Mental Health America. You can go to the National Institute of Mental Health. There's 1,001 places you can go online where scholarly people have put out what is known about depression, and you can see what it is that your loved one can and maybe cannot do. So learn, we don't have to fall to our default of fear and ignorance. We can go beyond that.
No, sounds excellent. And you're right. As long as we can find a way to be more open and be less judgmental, we can at least attempt to figure out the problems of somebody else, because it's very hard, as almost anyone knows, to understand somebody else's point of view.
It is hard. Oh my goodness, relatability is a tough one, and right now I am temporarily in a wheelchair because of a foot injury. But I'm already finding out after 2 weeks that I can relate a little better to people who have to live in wheelchairs. Of course, it's not the same thing, knowing that it's going to be temporary, but in many ways, I can understand better what it's like to be confined to a chair. And that kind of relatability, we don't always get the opportunity to do that. I read a story in the news today about a Salt Lake City mayor who went to a shelter and stayed overnight so that he could see what it is that his job was regarding homeless people. And that kind of stuff is amazing. We're not all going to be able to do that. Relatability is tough to come by sometimes. But what we can relate to and understand is what pain feels like. And if we can understand that for some people, pain is not going to be an easy fix. So we can step back and we can say, okay, you know what makes sense to me? If I was feeling the way they do, I might be acting the way they are. We can step back that far, and we can understand that much.
No, I probably want to do a podcast in the future about human emotions and which ones are good to cultivate. And one of the ones at the top of my list has to be empathy. To be able to try to at least try to understand somebody else's situation is mucho important.
Empathy is sometimes an emotion for some of us, I think, maybe who are a little more sensitive than others, and that's not a fault to either one. But empathy is more or less a thought process. It's something that we decide to be, and when we cultivate empathy, we do become people who are more supportive of those around us.
Now, going through this process, what are your future goals? We've been over how your mindset has shifted, how you've become more accepting of yourself and less judgmental of yourself. What are your future goals and what are you working on now?
You mean personally?
Personally, externally? You can go into both. Okay.
Well, I have built up this ministry. Always the Fight Ministries came about in 2012 with my very first presentation of my seminar, which is how to help hurting people without hurting yourself. The entire thing is about supports, helping loved ones who struggle, and how to do that without becoming overwhelmed. I think sometimes our fear is, if I get too involved here, I'll lose myself. And we don't have to fear that. There are some very, very practical ways to be an extremely effective support without losing a hold on your own sanity and life. So that's what that seminar is about. When I was able to lead that, it was actually on the 1-year anniversary of my suicide attempt, and it was, of course, very very poignant for me. But the ministry has grown since then. I do public speaking. I do a lot of radio and podcast. So my goals for the moment are to polish that to what I really, 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 really desire it to be. And that is a ministry from the heart. So very recently, I have gone through a change of mind and a change of focus in that ministry. It is now not something that I am trying to make an income off of. It is now just simply a service of the heart to people who need it. My books are now free. Speaking, I will accept donations, but I'm not asking. And that's where I want to be right now, because it keeps me centered on my real purpose, my real joy. Personally, I'm finding income in other ways. So that is where I am right now. It's not a strategy that most entrepreneurs would point to as a good one. But I think that many people who have given their lives to ministry of one sort or another, whether it's secular or faith-filled, I think they can probably relate to my dream of doing this from a pure heart. So that's where I am right now.
Mm-hmm. No, it sounds like you're at a place where you're at peace with yourself.
I am. And personally, it's like I said, depression exists, and I can say, oh, I'm all happy now, everything's fine. And that would be a flat out lie. Why would I say that to you? The truth is that depression can sometimes be a struggle, but I'm to the point where I know where I'm headed. I know why I'm here, and I know who I'm here for. So I don't have to settle anymore for feeling like I have nothing to live for. Those thoughts can come by, and I can manage them.
Mm-hmm. Now that was a good way. I think we'll end it there.
Okay.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, fine.
You said that you had a lot of good elegant segments. Oh.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Nancy. Hey everyone, it's me, AJ again. Thank you for listening. As always, all the show notes and links mentioned in this episode are on my website at psychowarfare.com. You can also go there to sign up for my email list and stay up to date on new content and updates. As always, feel free to email me with ideas, advertisers, or improvements, especially AJ@psychowarfare.com. AJ, 2 letters. Have the best day of your lives, ladies and gents.